This is Charlie Crockett, Texas musician and descendant of Davy Crockett, inviting you to visit the Alamo. It's not the same Alamo you, remember. There's lots of new things to experience, like the 500 artifacts inside the Alamo exhibit at the Ralston Family Collection Center, the new Mission Gate and Lunette outdoor exhibit, and Surrounded, the Alamo Augmented Experience. It's all part of an ongoing restoration and expansion that will write the Alamo's next chapter. So don't wait. Plan your visit today at thealamo.org.
Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. We asked, and Alamo enthusiasts more than delivered. It's been a year since the Alamo launched its Treasures of the Alamo campaign, calling on you to help us fill our pop culture gallery inside the future Visitor Center and Museum. Today we reveal the amazing treasures we've discovered, the stories behind these homegrown collections, and where you can see them first. I'm your host, Emily Balcom. Today we're joined by Nathan Jones, the Alamo's Director of Curation. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
Tell us about the response we've gotten to the Treasures of the Alamo campaign. It honestly feels like Christmas every time I hear about it.
Absolutely. So this was a campaign we launched last summer, bringing in pop culture items to the Alamo's collection. And we had a massive public response, including a few people we're going to talk about today. So one of my favorites was a gentleman named Davy Crockett, who was on the television show The Name's the Same, where they had to guess who shared the name with him. So he had stills from that television broadcast, as well as a small Crockett collection, because, of course, his name's the same.
Of course, you're going to collect Davy Crockett items.
Exactly. He had road signs. He had a great cookie jar, which has actually showed up in several collections now. And it was one of the early entries, and we just kind of snowballed from there, keeping with the winter Christmas theme that you started, where kind of every day you would get a different email. I might have waiting in my inbox probably about 4 or 5 a week, people with 1 or 2 items, or some people with several hundred items. And so we've connected with probably 4 or 5 major collectors of Alamo popular culture, which could mean a lot of different things. Just a lot of interesting material and getting into a side of the story, which the Alamo really hadn't collected previously. We have some artwork from the 1960 Wayne film, Wayne's hat, the Davy Crockett hat from that film, as well as a little bit from The Last Command, but not really much else for Alamo in Hollywood history and movie history.
Right, and for any new listeners, the reason we put out this public call for pop culture memorabilia is that, as you said, the Alamo really hadn't collected items like this before, but soon we're going to have a home for them.
The new Visitor Center and Museum is opening up in 2027, and we'll have a gallery completely devoted to the Alamo's popular culture story, or popular memory is one of the ways I like to talk about it. Because one of the things when you're talking about the Alamo story, obviously we get down into the details, we get down into what happened during the battle in 1836, as well as, what happened for the 300 years history on the site. But the thing about the Alamo is remembering the Alamo. And how people have remembered it over time. It gets shifted, it changes, the memory changes with time and with people, and we get that as we understand the historic account. But even in 1836, directly after the battle, you have works of art and literature being created to help people remember, to help share this story, the inspiring story of the defenders of the Alamo. One of my favorites, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, there's a line which is actually a poem about Goliad, but he famously talks about how he's not going to remember the Alamo at that point because everybody died. He doesn't have any information. And you have this story shifting over time. So by the time you get to the 20th century, the Alamo story with World War II, other national events, has kind of fallen down a little bit. But Disney releases a miniseries in 1955, Davy Crockett. And famously, Davy Crockett dies at the Alamo. And the last scene of that film is that. And so it's inspired a lot of passion around Davy Crockett, but also around the Alamo. Was really a major uptick moment in how the Alamo is tied to America's cultural memory.
As you said, a big entry point for people becoming Alamo enthusiasts is that 1960 movie, The Alamo, starring John Wayne. And because of this memorabilia campaign, the Alamo is getting some pieces of that movie's history.
So the 1960 Wayne film is this really second punch to the 1955 Disney's Davy Crockett as well. And so a gentleman who grew up with Davy Crockett, grew up with Last Command and some of the early films, was sent to work on a ranch in West Texas, a place called Bracketville. And his father, who was a bit of a kidder according to him, told him, they might be doing a small film while he was there, so maybe he could be an extra or something. So he walks into the ranch house in Bracketville, and there are a series of people seated at the table, and one of them's rather large. And he thinks he's being kidded, So goes up and essentially taps the man on the back, says, "You're not John Wayne." And the man turns around and it's John Wayne. And so from that point, he's offered a extra role in the film for his kind of summer retreat, and also given a camera by John Wayne and told to just take behind the scenes photos. So he donated a large collection of photographs as well as documents and ephemera related to that film and several others. It's really exciting to see kind of a unvarnished behind the scenes look at this iconic film and just his time in it. He also spent a long time as a Alamo reenactor. So it's been on the site for years.
So there's photos of John Wayne and the other stars of the movies. There's photos of the famous Waynamo, as people call it, the reproduction of the Alamo in Brackenville, Texas.
Right. And so this man's name is Doug Cohen. He lives in Florida now, and he came down with his collection. And one of the fun things of walking through these photographs, he's a bit of a ham. I don't think he'll mind me saying that, but he shows up in almost every still of the film. Doug Cohen is just kind of creeping into the background of the picture for the official stills. And then you have his point of view as well through his own camera. So it's a really fascinating story, and one that I hope we get to explore more as we develop that collection.
He's also donating a prop Bowie knife used in the film by Richard Widmark.
Right. So Richard Widmark's prop knife, which was gifted to him by John Wayne, one of several prop knives. But again, it's got an inscription from John Wayne on it. He's got a letter that goes with it, and he carried it as part of his reenactment outfit for many years. So it's got a lovely set of layers to that story, and it's just a great artifact that we'll definitely be using.
When you first laid eyes on these photographs, you must have just been amazed.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where looking at the photos of the films, taking the time to go through them, and then, remembering the films themselves, and like, wait a second, this isn't a still from the film. What the heck is happening here?
Candid moments.
Exactly. The candid moments, the point when someone gets hit with a piece of furniture or something ridiculous that isn't recorded. You don't get the blooper reels that you have for more modern films with these as often, or just the colorful commentary of someone who was standing next to John Wayne when a shot was made, or understanding what was happening for him as a director just by being there, even as a teenager.
So as part of taking in this collection of photographs, do you also record an oral history with it?
That is the plan, and hopefully we'll do that with all of the collectors who've come in here, because one of the nice things with popular cultural artifacts, a lot of them are mass-produced, so there's not a lot of differentiation, but people have very different stories and attachments to those artifacts. So even though it's, your McDonald's souvenir cup that came out in the 90s around some film or whatever, I have one from my childhood where there's like a very specific hole rubbed in this print where we were using it every day. And so just the stories of use that you can get from these artifacts, and the idea that history is accessible through every day, and the connecting to sites like the Alamo and moments like Crockett's death or John Wayne, whatever it is in American culture, that you can do it through stuff. It's one of the big powerful moments in museums.
Nathan's going to stay with us as we chat on the phone with one of the Alamo enthusiasts who so generously donated his treasures. Alamo podcast listener, Kevin Settle from Illinois. Kevin, how did you originally get into the Alamo story?
Well, it goes back a long time ago, as long as I can remember, actually. So kind of to put it in perspective, the first Walt Disney TV show, Davy Crockett and the Indian Fighter, came out when I was about a year old. And the other four all aired by the time I was 2. So even though I missed the actual beginning of the Davy Crockett craze, I got swept into the fury very young. And in fact, I have a picture of me in my coonskin cap and rifle and boots when I was 2.5 years old. I remember playing Davy Crockett in the Alamo for years with the neighborhood kids. It's just what we did, because everyone was involved and loved Davy Crockett and the Alamo. So probably by the time I was 4 or 5, I had several items, because he was my hero, and that's all I wanted was Davy Crockett t-shirts and hats and guns and records and books. So, as long as I can remember, I've been a Davy Crockett nut.
You visited the Alamo for the first time after graduating high school.
When I graduated, I actually talked my parents into letting me borrow the car, and we drove 1,000 miles from Charleston, Illinois, down to Texas, a friend of mine. And I'm still kind of surprised they let me do it, but they knew I wanted to see the Alamo in person more than anything in the world, and they said take off. So when I got there, it wasn't exactly as I pictured, but that feeling of being where Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie and William Travis and the other volunteers fought and died, it actually left an everlasting impression on me. At that time, I remember buying a few Alamo souvenirs when we were there, and I think that's probably the start of my memorabilia collection.
And you were a former teacher. You used to share the story of Crockett with your students.
when I graduated from college, my parents bought me an original flintlock rifle. Nathan may have seen it in my basement when he was here. It's similar to what they would have used at the Alamo. And then I moved to Mount Vernon, and I joined a black powder muzzleloading club. And that was the time of the country. We were just celebrating our bicentennial, and history and patriotism was again at an all-time high. And so shortly afterwards, I had my own set of buckskins and coonskin cap, and I built my own flintlock rifle. And then being a teacher, I knew how much kids like to be engaged in learning. So for decades now, I've been dressing up as Davy Crockett and reading books to school classes and telling the story of Davy Crockett and the Alamo. And just within the last year, I was invited to a family reading night. And of course, I dressed in my buckskins. I can't take my gun into the school anymore, but the kids really like it when they see Davy Crockett walking in. Occasionally, in fact, I get invited to talk to adult groups about the real Davy Crockett. And the way I like to do those is I have somebody start the record, The Ballad of Davy Crockett, and then I'll walk into the room with my buckskins and everything, and invariably the seniors are singing the song. I mean, everyone, my age and a little younger and older remember Davy Crockett, and heads nod when I talk about the Davy Crockett craze, and they start talking about the different kinds of things they had. It's just so enjoyable for me to talk to school-age kids and to adults.
That's so fun. And over the decades, you have been collecting Crockett memorabilia. Give us some examples of what's in your collection and how big the collection is.
As I mentioned, when I went to the Alamo the first time when I was age 18, that's when I kind of started buying a few things, but not actively. It wasn't until the 80s, before we had children and when they were younger, that I did my most intense collecting. My wife and I would go to flea markets, antique shows, yard sales, and we'd nearly always come home with something. There's just a lot of things out there. I also subscribed to the Antique Trader newspaper that came every week. And I remember I would come home from school every Thursday. I'd rush home and go through it to find the Davy Crockett items. During that period, I met a few other serious collectors, and we sent each other duplicates of what we found. It was really fun. Those are days where we didn't have internet.
Yeah, this is a pre-eBay world.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we had to pay for long distance phone calls, so we would correspond by mail. So I might find a duplicate of something, and I would take a picture, have it developed, mail it to one of my buddies, and then they would correspond back and take pictures and say, hey, I'll trade you this, or I'll buy that for this. And I had a friend out in actually Massachusetts and New York. So they would kind of cover the east part of the country, and a good friend in California, he get the west and I get the Midwest. And so, it's because some items are regional. So we built our collections by just sharing items like that. It was a fun time. It lasted 8 or 9 years probably.
Social networking before social networks. I love it.
Yeah. So some of the items, I think that's what your question was, in the collection, almost anything you can think of that's child related, they made Davy Crockett. It was crazy. I mean, the period, it's caught the country kind of by surprise, the mass marketing. And Walt Disney made the best items. If he made an official Walt Disney gun, it would look like a period gun, a flintlock, gun. The other companies, and they might take a Colt 45 and put a decal over the existing packaging and sell it. It had Davy Crockett, kids were going to buy it, or a modern looking rifle with a scope, and just have a sticker on it that said Davy Crockett. Things that quickly come to my mind, drinking glasses. I probably had 100 different drinking glasses in my collection, and rings, outfits, of course, coonskin caps and records, belts, lamps, clocks, tents, bedspreads, clothing, almost anything that a child would have in their room or play with, they made Davy Crockett.
And at one point, you had a goal to build your own Crockett memorabilia museum. Is that right?
That's correct. So when our family grew to 4, we needed a larger house. And we found one that was outside of town with the remains of an old log cabin. And I said, man, this is a house we need to buy, because I had plans for that log cabin. So and by then I had several display cases full of memorabilia. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be neat to restore this cabin and turn it into a Crockett memorabilia museum? Actually, after I got the cabin mostly restored, life happened, priorities changed, I changed jobs, our kids got involved with a lot of activities, and we eventually moved to a new home. So that museum in the log cabin never happened, but the house we moved into has a big basement. So I kind of created my own Davy Crockett memorabilia museum in the great room of my basement. Nathan and Misty got to see it when they were here last week.
Well, you and I first connected about a year ago. You wrote me a very kind email about the Alamo podcast, and you shared photos of your collection. And that email came right as the Alamo was launching the Treasures campaign. What was your reaction when you realized we were very, very interested in your collection?
First of all, I was really surprised about the podcast. I was kind of had a medical issue where I couldn't be very active, and so I started listening to those. I couldn't wait till to listen to them. We'll listen to all the back issues because your guests are so interesting and always upbeat and enthusiastic about the Alamo. And honestly, I had no idea there were so many experts in different fields that the Alamo has working there, and how the Alamo always is continually improving and expanding. And every time I'm there, I see that, but it's just a planned effort to make sure the Alamos can be there for generations to come. So I just, on a whim, sent you the email, saying that, hey, your podcast have really helped me. And I'm kind of a Davy Crockett collector. I think I attached me a couple
You
pictures.
did,
And,
yes.
and from there, it just, I couldn't believe it because it was like, well, you got to listen. Wait till next week's podcast because we're actually going to do an all call for people to donate items to the Pop Culture Museum. And so I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. So I shared the email with my wife and we talked and we said, I wonder if some of the things I have, if they'd be interested in it. Talked to our son and daughter and told them, and they said, well, Dad, you've got to do it. You've got to donate some of your items to the Alamo. If they'll take them, that's where they need to be. So then Colby Lanham, and you called me, I sent some pictures, more pictures down. And when, he said, Kevin, your collection is pretty extensive. There are some neat pieces in here. And man, it made me really feel good, to be honest, and everyone I've talked to with the Alamo has just been so kind and just very easy to work with. Well, things progressed, and we kind of said, what, would you be interested in the whole collection? And that's when Nathan really got involved with it. And I sent pictures and had a kind of somewhat of a loose inventory. And when he called me back and said, what, we're interested in the entire collection of 805 items. I thought, whoa.
Wait, repeat how many items?
805 items were in the collection that was taken to the Alamo last week.
That is
So,
remarkable. And bringing Nathan back in, Nathan, you just got back from Kevin's home in Illinois where you picked up his collection. And you two have been in contact, as he said, over the past several months about organizing and cataloging it.
So one of the things, and Kevin, I'm going to continue to be a kind person from the Alamo, but Kevin is a rock star of a collector. And as far as getting things done and working with us to make sure that we have what we need, his pseudo inventory, as he calls it, like it's a complete inventory. He helped us so much in the fact that we could go to his home where they generously hosted us and get this collection packed and moved in really a day. It's 805 objects, many of them glass, many of them are breakable, but Kevin had done all of the legwork we'd asked him to do and more, and also had, done the work over the years to organize and put together the collection in such a way that we could move it easily and bring it home to the Alamo now, which is exciting.
We're talking about everything from china, plates, glasses, to toys, to rocking chairs. It was a lot. And
a lot.
Kevin, you had spreadsheets where you listed it out and you numbered it and you described it. You truly organized and cataloged it.
I mean, honestly, it was good for me to do that. I'm really glad I sorted and organized because it caused me to handle each item one last time. And it just brought back great memories, as I was going through things. So I was happy to do it.
Speaking of memories like that, Kevin, one of the things I wanted to ask you about when you were talking about how you collected and these writing letters and long distance phone calls and back and forth, we don't have the internet. There's not this published inventory of all of the stuff that came out in 55 and 56 for the Crockett craze. So can you describe kind of the moment of slowly realizing that one of your friends has something that you've been interested in or never seen before?
Oh, yeah. It was really fun because what would turn out to be, I'm not even sure how I met these people because I know I do remember because when I was responding to an ad in the Antique Trader, I bought some things that I think Joe Pinocchio from California had listed.
Joe Pinocchio. That is an amazing name.
Yeah, what a great guy. And I haven't talked to him for 40 years. But anyway, I said, well, I'm a collector. And so then we started just, instead of putting things for sale in the Antique Trader, then we would actually send stuff back and forth. And I remember I had one of my treasures is an unopened pack of Davy Crockett cards. In 1956, they made 2 series of Davy Crockett cards, just like baseball cards. And they had pictures of scenes from the movies. And I acquired 2 unopened sets of those. And I just really, they were something. And Joe wanted one of those so bad. And I really didn't want to give up one. And he just said, Kevin, I really need this. I really want one of these. I'll trade you all kinds of stuff for it. He ended up getting one. I don't remember what I got in trade for it, but he wanted it so bad. And because he sacrificed things for me because I wanted them so bad.
Kevin, can
Yeah,
you also take a moment to introduce your wife and talk a little bit about your family? They're so integral to your collecting story.
My wife, Cheryl, we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary this past month. When we were dating in college, we first met each other. She thought it was like kind of weirdly neat that I had this Davy Crockett stuff. Because, I mean, she grew up at the same time. She knew about Davy Crockett. But for me to be a collector of stuff in college, I mean, I was buying Davy Crockett stuff while other people were spending their money on whatever. So I had, before kids, I already had a pretty good sized collection. So they grew up looking at all the different kinds of things in the display cases and listening to the records and, of course, buying the books. And I'm brainwashing them on Davy Crockett and the Alamo. So, yeah, our son is a veterinarian near Chicago, and our daughter is a curator of a museum here in Mount Vernon. And they are so supportive of the decision and help decide, to offer everything to the Alamo. So I can't say enough about their support.
You mentioned that this was a trip down memory lane for you to touch each piece of your collection one last time, remember how you got it. And I'm also wondering, though, is there a little bit of sadness that this collection in some ways is your life's work and having to part with it?
Absolutely. I mean, it was really an emotional decision when we talked to you and to Colby and Nathan about donating the entire collection. I thought, wow, I mean, this is 50 years of my life. And I see it every day. My kids grew up with it. My grandkids, they like it. I mean, it's the right thing to do. I mean, I kept 4 items from when I was a kid: a book, 2 records, and a coonskin cap that my mom made for me.
Aww.
And I also kept a David. Yeah, I had to keep those things. Yeah, they're not at the Alamo yet. But then also our son and daughter gave me a book in 1989, and I kept that because I still read it. I still go into the schools. I thought, well, that's one of my favorite books I read to kids. So I kept those five items. I kept it. All the rest of them went to the Alamo, and I really feel good about it, though.
Can you put into words what it means to you that to know for generations to come, your treasures will be on display at the Alamo with your name next to it?
Yes, it means a lot to know that other people will get to see and enjoy the pieces of my collection. I mean, this is a much better ending to over 50 years of collecting than I would have ever imagined. I observed Nathan and Missy, packing up the things and with such care. And Missy told us, that about the climate controlled vault that they're going to be and storing the items and rotating the stocks so they don't, get hurt from the light. And that way kind of ensure that generations to come are going to get to see those items. For me to think that thousands of people every year will get to see some of my treasures, it means more than I can express, really.
And Nathan, obviously, we're going to have all kinds of centuries-old artifacts on display in the Visitor Center and Museum. But the Pop Culture Gallery will really complete the circle of the Alamo story.
Absolutely. Again, when you think about how you remember the Alamo, the first point for so many people is through film, through art, through books or something like that. And for generations, the Crockett craze in the 1950s was that entry point and that moment when most of our main supporters, Alamo enthusiasts who are alive today, they got into it. And they've got really into the Alamo, as this 800 object collection, and others will attest for sure. So it's just such an exciting thing to be able to share that moment and help kind of cross-generationally. So have grandparents and their grandchildren come through and be able to share in the same way that those grandchildren are excited about Marvel toys or something else. The grandparents were equally excited about Crockett toys, if not more so. Just that's such a cool moment to be able to facilitate our guests having.
Well, Kevin, when the Visitor Center and Museum opens in 2027, a VIP tour on us for all you've done for the Alamo.
Hey, that's great. Just kind of an aside, but one of the neat things of my life was when I got to take my wife to the Alamo, and 10 years later, we took our kids. And last January, actually 35 of my family members and closest friends went to the Alamo to celebrate my 70th birthday party. And we had dinner in the Rawson Family Collection Center, and it was just amazing. It just amazed me how continually the Alamo grounds are kept up and new exhibits, and it's just state of the art. It's just wonderful.
And your Alamo story is not over. There's more to be shared. Nathan Jones and Kevin Settle, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to photos of some of the treasures being donated so you can get a sneak peek at how the Pop Culture Gallery inside the future Visitor Center and Museum is taking shape. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.